Today on MuscleCar, Lou's giving old Blue Hair a new backbone, a looped fuel system, and more. If all goes well, he'll turn the key.
Fire it up.
And later, the elusive 67 Indy 500 Camaro pace car. We'll have some tips on how to find one.
Hey, welcome to MuscleCar. Like the sign back there says, we're all about a generation of badass cars. Like our sleeper project here. It looks like a grandma's car, and actually, it was till we got a hold of it. Now, we've hid all the power and muscle out of sight on this baby, and that's why they call it a sleeper. But I've got a lot of work to do today, so I'm going to show you what we've already done. Blue Hair came in here bone stock, and I mean bone stock. 6-cylinder, 2-speed power glide, and only 33,000 miles on her. A perfect starting point for a sleeper. Granny car on the outside, street car underneath. The first thing we did was pull off that front clip and stuffed an LS364 crate motor in there. Behind that, we put a Rockland 6-speed, a T56. Everything's sitting nice and low to clear the stock hood. I had to fab up some custom headers, and all that started with some flanges from Hooker. And to make room for that transmission, it required a little bit of internal fabrication, which will continue in the next few weeks. Up front, some Detroit speed control arms and a disc brake conversion for massive power brakes. Then the sheet metal went back on. Think of it as a subtle yet effective disguise. Now, we could have used just about any GM small block, but we decided to go with this 4th generation LS2 stroker, which is really cool because it's basically the same engine you'd find in a new C6 Vet. This thing's 364 cubic inches, making 440 horse right out of the crate. The LS2 is a direct descendant of the most popular hot rod engine ever.
The new Turbo Fire V8 engine.
The classic small block Chevrolet. More than 90 million made and still in production today. 2nd generation in 1992, the LT1. Not the same engine that went into Camaros and Vets in 1970, but that is where they got the name. Higher compression, better cooling, a little stronger, but still a cast iron block. Serious changes came along with the 3rd generation LS1 in 97. A 6-bolt aluminum block, a longer stroke for more torque, individual coils for each cylinder, and a different firing order. And the 4th generation, the one we're using, is so advanced, GM set up a new engine plant just to build it. Higher compression and special shaped combustion chambers are just 2 of the reasons the LS2 small block pulls more than 400 horsepower dead stock. Here in the shop, I'm gonna respect the old school methods. I'm gonna run this 750 Mighty Demon from Barry Grant. It's the perfect mix of 60s muscle and 21st century technology. And that can get complicated. The LS364 has electronic ignition with no distributor. The engine computer picks up pulses from a reluctor wheel on the crankshaft and uses that information to control the spark. But the wheel is different in the new LS's. More teeth for more pulses and better signal to the computer. With that in mind, you've got 2 options. You can tear apart your brand new crate engine and put a 24-tooth reluctor ring on it, or you can buy an aftermarket ignition setup like this one from Fast, and it'll talk to your 58-tooth reluctor ring. Now, we got the very first one, or close to it. Fast built us this special prototype just for this project. To avoid the engine heat, I'm mounting it on the tow board, which I'll box in later. There are only 4 connections to make, including the all-important reluctor sensor. Well, we're real close to firing this thing up and completely overpowering Granny's old ride. Nothing some frame connectors can't fix, and you'll see that after the break. Welcome back to the shop. We're gonna wake up our sleeper today. We're gonna fire up this crate engine. Now, this thing makes over 400 foot-pounds of torque. That's way more twist than this old body can stand. So I'm going to put in some subframe connectors, and I like to do mine on jack stands. Let me tell you why. Those second generation Novas were unibody cars. They had front and rear subframes. Our crate mode is strong enough to twist that way out of shape. And on top of that, this old body sags a little. So we're gonna get it up on jack stands and let the weight of the engine reverse that bend. Then we'll connect the front and rear subframes together with some tubing. Then we're gonna tie the connectors to the rocker panels for some extra support. It all starts with clearing out the floor. This is not demolition because it's all gonna go back in later. Underneath, with a 2-inch wide template, I can locate where the connector will go, and then transfer those markings up through the floor. And the reason why I did this is because I'll take my template and line up my holes, and then I mark it, and when I remove it, I know exactly what to cut out because I'm gonna weld the floor to the frame connector. It's neater and it's stronger because it ties everything together. I'm using 2x2 065 wall tubing. That's more than enough for this project. The rear of the connector is gonna get notched to clear the brake line and the gas line, then boxed to give it strength. The front gets an angle cut to butt up against the subframe. I'll box it in, leaving access to the body mount. And use plates to secure the rear. And with 1-inch square tubing, tie them to the rocker panel. I guarantee this new backbone straightened out old blue hair. I can see the difference that these connectors made on the car. They're subtle, yet they're apparent. Before, this gap used to be tighter because the car was sagging. Now it's further apart because the sag is gone and the car is straight. And look at this, even the door gap is tighter and the door closes better. Now, something you gotta realize, any car this old is gonna have sag in it, and it's gonna contribute to wind noise, rattling, and even poor handling. So whether you're doing a full-blown resto or a hot rod, you may wanna consider some frame connectors. I put a notch in my frame connector to hold this garden hose that's masquerading as a Dash 8 fuel line, because this engine's gonna suck a lot of fuel, and to move all that fuel, I've got this Barry Grant Mighty Enduro pump. The thing that's neat about it is totally rebuildable, and it's got an 8-micron filter in it, but I've encountered a slight problem. It's too big to mount under the car. Too big to hide anyway. So to keep with that original sleeper profile, I'm putting it right here in the trunk, right next to the original spare tire. This thing pushes a lot of fuel at 18 PSI, but we only need 7 and 9 at wide open throttle. Now, we're not just gonna choke this down with the regulators. What we're gonna do is go beyond that. We're gonna run a loop system, which is found on most of your modern day EFI setups. And here's why. This is the traditional way to run a fuel system. A tank, a pump, a regulator. Fuel goes in the carb and gets burned. It's pretty simple, but pressure builds up in the fuel line, so the system can back up and make the pump run hot. With the 3-port bypass regulator, excess fuel is returned back to the tank by a return line. So fuel is constantly flowing through the electric pump at all times. The gas is always circulating, no built-up pressure in the system, everything stays cool. And I'm also going to install this heat sink. It acts like a small radiator and it cools the fuel as it goes through. So I'm going to put it up here for maximum airflow. This system means we run 2 lines, a feed and a return. The original tank wasn't set up for a return line, and it's trash anyway. So I got this OEM replacement from Classic Industries. It's a direct reproduction of an original, so it doesn't have a return line either. But I can fix that. The last thing I want to do is have metal shavings in my new gas tank. By putting Vaseline on my unibit, it'll catch most of the shavings. And then I'll do the same to my screwdriver and clean up any that fell in the tank. Ooh, look at, oh, that's a big one. I'm using a Dash 8 bulkhead fitting for the return. And I drilled out the original pickup fitting wide enough for more Dash 8 line. And to keep all this hidden, it's mounted on the top of the tank, which will take up a little bit of trunk room. Now when we get back from the break, I'm gonna finish plumbing up the fuel system, button up underneath the hood, and then we're gonna see if we can get a heartbeat from old blue hair.
Remember the 1967 Indy 500 Camaro pace car? We've seen a lot of clones. When MuscleCar returns, we'll show you an original and how to tell the difference.
If you got an old Camaro, you might want to listen up. It could be worth more than you think. Back in '67, Chevy made some for pace cars for the Indy 500, and they got sold after the race. And some of them are still missing.
This week's MuscleCar Flashback, the '67 Indy 500 Camaro.
Right up front at the #1 biggest race in the world, the brand new '67 Camaro was pace car for the Indy 500 and a sweet ride for beauty queens and big shots in the parade. 81 Camaros went to the Brickyard that year, mostly 350s, a few 396s, some automatics, some 4-speeds, all of them convertibles, all of them white with blue trim. But when the race was over, they were just used cars. And the local Chevy dealers sold them. There's no telling where they all went. Tom Huber found number 19 sitting in the weeds outside of a body shop about an hour from the track. Putting it in show condition took 11 years on and off. Original 354 barrel, original 2-speed power glide, and bucket seats. It's not just restored, it's right. Tom is so into this that he won't even use new bolts if he can find old ones.
Well, I went to the junkyard and get all the 67 bolts and get the best ones, restored them. These bolts are in the correct position.
All the glass is original except the windshield. He put the old production codes on it so it matched. And the brake reservoir got replated twice to get the color just right. This one is so perfect, he's almost scared to drive it. Almost. Tom's a retired drag racer, so he enjoys a good run. GM's not sure how many white Camaros they built in '67, but there were a bunch of them. So here's how you can tell if yours is a genuine Indy Camaro. It's gotta be a '67 SS RS convertible, all white with blue trim. Interior, blue vinyl with an Impala steering wheel. White around the taillights, that's called a cove panel. On most early SS's, it's black. All the glass is clear, no tint. And if the pace car lettering is still there, it should be under the clear coat. Once all that checks out, look under the hood. If the body code on the firewall data plate starts with NOR and the paint code is 01, you've got it. The car was actually there on race day. And that'll more than double what it's worth. A '67 RS SS convertible in good shape goes for about 35 grand restored. The real parade cars are 75 and up. Nobody, not even GM, knows for sure how many are left. But Tom found his Camaro just by knowing what to look for. And now there's just an outside chance you can too. If you want to look at another shot of that data plate, go to PowerBlockTV.com and click on what else? MuscleCar. We'll be back on Old Blue Hair in a minute. Welcome back to the shop. I'm running out of time and I'm determined to turn the key on Project Blue Hair. In case you just got here, here's what you missed. I added frame connectors to the unibody to pull the sag out and keep the engine torque from twisting the body. I started a loop fuel system that'll cool the fuel and keep the pressure steady, just like an EFI setup, but it's also great for a carbureted engine. And now it's time to finish up our fuel system under the hood, starting with this bypass regulator. Fuel's gonna come in from the tank. When it leaves, it's gonna go to the carburetor at 7 to 9 PSI. And the excess fuel's gonna come out this port, going back to the tank. That's why they call it a loop. And it's really cool because it protects the system from overpressurizing. And I protected the pump from any power surges by feeding it through this distribution block with a 50 amp fuse, right here next to the battery. A little weight in the rear end never hurt anybody. I even installed an on-off switch underneath the dash for our fuel pump, just in case. Now, I called the guys over at Detroit Speed and Engineering and had them whip me up this custom serpentine setup. It's a prototype, but it will be available on their website real soon. Now, this is a non-AC unit because our Nova was non-AC, and I'd rather keep it that way so I can have the extra ponies. This kit starts with a Stewart high-flow water pump, which relocates the thermostat housing to the top for better clearance. All the pulleys are CNC machined from lightweight 6160 aluminum. It also came with a PowerMaster 140 amp alternator. And the steering pump is a new GM design that's been revalved for better driving response. I gotta tell you, for a prototype, they nailed it. Newer engines of today, like ours, are designed to run about 20 degrees hotter than they did in the past. It makes for better emissions and better fuel consumption, so an aluminum radiator is better suited to dissipate that heat. AFCO sent us their direct replacement radiator with an electric fan and shroud built in. But to keep our sleeper disguised, I painted the front black. All that remains are the hoses, the coolant, and finish up the wiring. I've already filled our gas tank up, and because our LS2 has got 10-to-1 compression, this baby's only gonna drink 93 octane. So let's check the fuel system and see if we got any leaks. I'm gonna roughly dial in my fuel pressure to 8 psi. This way, when it's running, I can really dial it in. Fire it up! How's that for a heart transplant? Now, if you remember, this fast unit is a non-adjustable prototype. They are working on one that you can tune. I still can dial in the carburetor though. Next week, I'm playing with the rear end, and I got a surprise on the exhaust. Later.